Thanks very much for coming today. I think we're going to get underway. My name is Eric Hove. I'm Acting Director of Land Use Policy at the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. I'm really pleased to present our panelists today. Three experts from around New England who are doing really great work on low-impact development. And I think we're seeing much more interest and excitement generated from low-impact development. As an idea, it's been around for a while, but in terms of practice, it's just now starting to take off. And what we're going to talk about today is some of the research that's been really added to the body of knowledge about how these technologies work, what their performances are, and also some of the struggles on the ground in terms of project proponents that would like to use low-impact development technologies and techniques, but may have run into problems with either lack of knowledge, distrust of the performance of this technology, and also local and state zoning and other regulations which may inhibit the more widespread adoption of these technologies. So I'm very pleased to present the three speakers. I think in reverse order, starting with Sarah Cohn.
That's reverse order.
Reverse order.
Oh, you're introducing her, so I thought you were calling.
No.
I'm sorry.
Sarah Cohn will be the final speaker of the session. She comes from the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. Dr. Robert Rosine from the UNH Stormwater Center. And our first speaker today is Jerry Sheen from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, the Water Resources Research Center. So Jerry, please start.
Hi. The program that I work for that brings me here today is the Massachusetts Stormwater Technology Evaluation Project, otherwise known as MASTEP. And what we do in that is we evaluate stormwater best management practices under an EPA 319 grant through the Department of Environmental Protection. Target audiences for the website that we have that presents our information are conservation commissions, engineers, developers, NGOs, state and federal agencies. And what we do, we don't actually evaluate the technologies directly in the field. You're going to hear some stories from Rob about that. But we review studies that others have done and try to interpret them for the target audiences. What we do in particular is we rate the validity of the data, we don't rate the effectiveness of pollution removal of that. This is what one of the our front page looks like, by the way, and I'm not going to get into all the different nooks and crannies of the website. I'm just going to give you kind of the highlights of having to do with performance effectiveness. And this is an example of one of the pages on our website, just to give you a sense. You can see here, if I can get this to work, there we go. The list of pollutants that a particular device is supposed to or claims to be effective in addressing. What we report is, as given to us, the manufacturer's claim for pollution removal efficiency, and as the studies that we look at present the tested removal efficiency. Notice in this case there are several other pollutants that the manufacturer doesn't claim to treat or address, but in fact there is some efficiency that's done. Now the only thing that we actually add to this is the number that we give. We have a rating system: 1, 2, 3, or 4. Number 1 means we think it's a very good study. This is based on a set of criteria that several states have agreed upon under the Technology Acceptance Reciprocity Partnership, otherwise known as TARP. Not the TARP that's in the news these days, but another one. And again, 1 is a very highly rated study. 2 is a good study. There are some caveats about it. 3, significant category caveats. And number 4 means there really isn't any reliable data of worth. And just very briefly, what causes us to discredit a study and the technology that one or more studies will apply to. Number 1, one category is they're narrower or inappropriately focused in terms of what they're looking at. A good example of this is some studies will have tested only at very low flow rates or very high sediment particle sizes, both of which might be inappropriate to a true evaluation of the performance of the product. Small sample size. They're not looking at enough storms, not looking at enough rainfall to give you confidence that you can really extrapolate from there. Or inadequate documentation is the third area. There's no quality assurance plan, or they don't document the methods that they've been using, no site plan described or anything. And the last, perhaps the most worst, is faulty methods, when there are actually problems that are encountered that render what data they do get unusable or compromise the usability. Now, initially, we were looking at proprietary flow-through devices, and most of the BMPs that are on our website, there's about 55 in all, are of that type. Now, in the last year or so, we've been looking at more LID systems, and LIDs can be more difficult to evaluate than proprietary systems for a number of reasons. There are broader objectives in terms of what they're trying to accomplish that don't necessarily translate to testing well. One of the big things is that LID systems, many of them have flood attenuation or groundwater recharge benefits that the proprietary flow systems don't have. But then, and also there's a lot broader sense of, at least what we're seeing in some of the types of pollutants that they're trying to address, nutrients, metals, etc. But some of the problems that you get in trying to address them is, for one thing, it's not a simple test of comparing the influent versus the effluent. Do I have that direction right? Where you can easily set up a sampling station in one and the other and compare the two. You get to an LID system, for example, and there's no individual influent location. They're coming from a lot of different places. Sometimes there's an effluent, sometimes there's not, because it drops out through the ground level. So you don't have that simple testing mechanism. And then there are other times when an LID development has several different components. If you could imagine, for instance, that this is a porous pavement in addition to the bioretention area, and maybe on the other side of the roof is there's a rain garden or a roof garden. How do you put all those together and get a nice comparison number out of that? And we found that actually in the work that we've done. We've done a literature review of about 160 studies or so, and out of that we got only about 30 or so far that we can actually even evaluate and apply against the criteria that we've been using. And that has translated to 17 technologies that are LID types on our website. And those are broken down into a number of different categories. I'm going to show you that in a second. This, by the way, is one of them. This is the only proprietary LID system we have. Filtera Company makes a bioretention system. And then there are several other types. But when we look into the numbers that I'm about to show you now, about to talk about now, another thing to be careful of is the numbers that are listed here in terms of TSS removal, nutrient removal, bacteria removal. Those mean different things often in the LID studies than they do in the proprietary studies, whereas again, 90% or more of the proprietary studies are looking at influent versus effluent and comparing the two. In this case, you've got a lot of before and after. You've got a control site versus an LID site, and those things don't always match up. For example, in this Jordan Cove project, actually no, not so much that one, but the one or two of these Wisconsin ones that were done, where they found an increase in I think it was the Jordan Cove. Yeah, there was actually an increase in sediment that came out of that, but what they were comparing was before and after, and the percent impervious surface had moved from 0% to 22% in the course of the development of the project. So you're not really, people look at that and say, well, there's an actual, it's gotten worse. But you're not comparing the same thing, so you have to be careful when you are looking at those numbers to know what they mean. And so, in terms of the breakdown, these top three that we have are mixed developments, a lot of different types of LIDs put into, in some cases, some very large developments. Several bioretention cells or gardens of different types. There's the one Filtera, the proprietary one, and then there's a number of either mixed and then these porous pavement types. Those are the general categories that we have. And just a few results that I can give you, and these are very generalized. You will see that these numbers in both cases, you have a pretty good infiltration. They seem to do well at that, at least the ones that are designed to do that. Total suspended solids seems to be all over the map. You get some that actually are contributing TSS to the downstream, and others that are doing rather well. Nutrient removal, same thing. There's a great variety there. We have found, though, it seems to me, by the way, these numbers being very broad here, going back and forth there, if you broke them out by nutrient type, you'd see that there's a little bit better clustering. And some of the worst ones that you see there happen to be total phosphorus, and at least, and again, this is not a big, I can't make broad proclamations about this because I don't think there's enough studies in here to really do that. But we did find, for instance, that in some cases, some of the high contributions of phosphorus rather than reduction had to do with the existing soils that were used. One or two studies found that soils that were used to create these bioretention cells that had high phosphorus indices to begin with were contributing phosphorus to the environment. And they actually did a comparison where they tried another one that started with soils with lower phosphorus index and got much better results. Same thing with nitrogen. You get some cases they're developed in ways that they have anaerobic conditions down at the bottom, and that can reduce some of the nitrogen types, but not others. We found actually pretty good, decent removal of metals in the studies that we looked at, which is actually less of a spread than we found looking at a lot of the proprietary devices. Bacteria, again, there's only 2 studies here, but and oil and gas, the removal rates seem pretty good with that. But again, the thing that the moral of say this short story that I'm giving you right now is that looking at these numbers, you see a rather wide variety. It's important to look at each study and see what they have to say about why the conditions were such. And if you go to our website, we do have a comparison table like this, but we also have a little bit of detail on each study that we have. You can also read the study itself if you want to go through the whole thing to get a sense of that. But depending on what the objectives are for the and the design type, you can get some very good removal rates on a lot of these, and you may be sacrificing some removal rates on other pollutants. And the other thing that I will tell you is that when you get these kind of mixed developments here, it's very difficult, we found, to quantitatively evaluate in toto the removal capacity of various types of pollutants. If you're designing something like that, I would suggest that what you do is go down to some of the individual components of representative studies and types that have been done, try to evaluate those, pick the ones that are most effective, and then calculate by just combining the individual components an estimated total removal or efficiency or performance effectiveness of your product. That's all I have time for today, but I'm happy to work with the question things. Those going to happen at the end, or okay, great. Okay, thanks.
Might be.
Switch from the turn this thing off.
All right, hi. Nice to be here today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. My name is Robert Rosine. I'm the director of the University of New Hampshire Stormwater Center, and I'm going to give you kind of a brief overview on the work that we've been doing up there for the past 5 years. Can you folks in the back hear me all right? Okay. Great. So a little bit about why are we trying to fundamentally change stormwater. There's a variety of reasons. If we're at the Smart Growth Conference, we're aware that there's a lot more to stormwater than simply water quality. There are many of the tangential issues that really are related to quality of life, community development, community revitalization, things of that sort. Much of the focus on stormwater has really been water quality based for a while. And we're really trying to change many of those to include impacts, say, to urban infrastructure and some of the more holistic approaches of really looking at water as a resource as opposed to, in the instance of stormwater, something that is simply a nuisance which is piped out and discharged elsewhere. So the types of things that have motivated us for water quality management over time is really instances like these, the Cuyahoga River catching on fire that really got the Clean Water Act moving. It is always the case of something getting worse before it gets better to really galvanize interest. In the case of stormwater management, one of the big things and one of the reasons why we talk more broadly in the infrastructure piece is where communities are observing impacts from climate change now. Climate change, one of the elements about this is land use impacts to storm volumes and subsequent flooding. And this is one element of low-impact development designs that can really help mitigate short-term impacts from climate change. So why is it that we're focused on LID, or low-impact development stormwater design? Research in the 90s has showed that most stormwater treatment devices fail some portion of the time, say 2/3 of the time, for some water quality constituent. So what does that mean? It means the water coming out of the stormwater management device is worse than that going into it. As an example, this is our influent concentration, this is our effluent concentration, this is our line of no effect. We have wet ponds, dry ponds, and swales. If all the systems were doing well, they would be plotting on this side. So for example, this system's coming in at say 45 milligrams per liter, and it's coming out at 8 milligrams per liter. This is for solids. But in comparison, this system's coming in at about 10 milligrams per liter and going out at about 70 milligrams per liter. So it'd be nice to say that we see a clear trend. The wet ponds in general do perform somewhat reasonably well. The dry ponds don't do very well at all, and the swale really has no pattern of performance. That represents 95, 96, 97% of our stormwater management today. That explains much of our current water quality woes. So the primary cause of water quality degradation and stressed municipal infrastructure is very simple. It's altered hydrology. And this can be corrected by LID designs. LID designs look at storm volume reduction through infiltration, so basically recreating that hydrologic cycle, putting some of the water back into the ground. And that same element of filtration or infiltration has a water quality benefit. You're essentially using a natural soil or an engineered soil media to do much of your treatment. LID designs are not rocket science. It's important that they're built right. It's important that they're designed right. But in effect, much of what we're building are stormwater leach fields. We've been building septic systems for a long time. We've been using sand filtration for drinking water treatment for hundreds of years. These concepts are well-proven concepts. We're now just beginning to apply them to stormwater management. So that's where the Stormwater Center comes in. Our function is really two-part: research and development of stormwater treatment systems, and secondly, to provide an education and outreach resource to stormwater management communities. The function of the Stormwater Center is for us to test stormwater management designs to see what works and what doesn't work so that you don't have to. If you have ever been through the design and planning of a stormwater system and had to go through in front of a planning board or town council and go through the process of trying to convince folks, if you then have a system fail, that's the last time anybody's going to try that in that town for quite a while. So you want to have the bugs worked out in advance. So a little bit on the Stormwater Center. We have a 9-acre field. We have a 9-acre watershed. Everything is plumbed to the corner of the lot. The lot was actually built in 1996. And we built this site in 2003. All the water comes to the corner of the site and is then plumbed into parallel treatment systems. So we have a 1-acre site. We've tested a little over 20 systems now. And as Jerry can attest to, one of the big challenges of evaluating performance of stormwater BMPs is that it's tough to evaluate different loading characteristics at different sites. So for example, if I'm comparing performance at a gas station parking lot to a residential site to a commercial site, the watershed characteristics as well as the storm event characteristics are going to affect system performance. The advantage of something like this is we have systems tested in parallel. So the types of systems that we've tested to date have been 11 different manufactured systems, from hydrodynamic separators to subsurface detention and infiltration systems. These are the types of systems that are going below parking lots and big box stores, to certain types of filtration systems, to conventional devices, retention ponds, dry ponds, wet ponds, to a range of different types of swales. In New Hampshire we call this the dirty ditch, some places they call it a swale, to a range of different low impact development devices. Some of these would be pervious pavements, porous asphalt, pervious concrete, to treatment wetlands, sand filters, bioretention, to tree filters, or essentially bioretention in a box. A little quick background here on porous pavements. Porous pavements, really, there's many aspects, or many different types of porous pavements. The two I'm going to focus on are pervious concrete and porous asphalt. The similarities are probably more important than the differences, although there are some important differences. In general, what we have is a pavement where you're leaving the voids out. You're leaving the fines out. So when you're selecting your aggregate, you're leaving the sand-sized particles and smaller out of the mix, and you're adding a special sauce to this mix to really compensate for the lack of strength. And you're ending up with a pavement surface that has about a 20% void space. Now, when you think of porous pavements, though, it's a lot more than the pavement. It's not just the top. What it really is the subbase as well. So a porous pavement system has a pavement on top and then has a fairly sophisticated reservoir subbase underneath it. There is a storage reservoir, there's a filter course, and then there's a capillary barrier. The capillary barrier would be the bottom layer that you would design to reduce freeze-thaw impacts in northern climates. Pervious concrete. Probably the most important element to know is it's very tough to install. You need to get qualified installers in it. When you get a quality installation in place, it's bomb-proof, and it'll last for a very long time, and probably outlast any other pervious pavement. But it's hard to install. Porous asphalt, on the flip side, is very easy to install. If somebody has installed asphalt before, they can install porous asphalt. The difference being that the subbase is critical, and that the mix is important. So the design, the mix production are really the key elements. And when you look at porous pavements, it's not hard to find a lot of failures out there. I would say the majority of failures are really two reasons: poor mix production and poor engineering oversight. It's not like a lot of projects where engineers design them, they sign off, and then they're lucky if they see the site again. You need to pay attention to the compaction of the site. You need to pay attention to the mix that's being delivered to the site. It's a lot more than a traditional parking lot. So how do they work? Let's give you an example here. This would be the equivalent of a 43-inch rainfall event in about 3 minutes. So in this area, that's roughly a year's worth of rainfall in about 3 minutes. This is a pervious concrete parking lot. In the interest of time, I won't let this run the whole time, but it's really quite impressive. And we actually did this demonstration last week where we're running one of our porous pavement workshops, and it functions the same in the winter as it does in the summer. So this is an example of what performance looks like out of a porous pavement. So this would be our rainfall on the top. This is a 0.6-inch rainfall event. It's a pretty big storm. This is what the rainfall runoff would look like on an impervious pavement. Here is the rainfall runoff out of a porous pavement system. Okay, at about 800 minutes, it creeps out of it. There's almost no runoff. This is on a sea soil. This is a site that a lot of folks don't even try to do infiltration on. Porous pavements are really not your typical infiltration system. Because you don't have a high hydraulic loading rate, you have the same watershed area as treatment area. You're not constrained by the same challenges that you typically are with bioretention and other things. You don't have those limitations. Here's a 3-inch storm. This is greater than the 2-year storm. This is a big storm. Here's your rainfall runoff on an impervious parking lot. Here it is about 1,000 minutes later, just creeping out of the pavement. And this is not surface runoff. This is not running off the top of the pavement. This is what's coming out of the subdrains of the system. So a little bit on the performance results. LID systems. If somebody doesn't want to install an LID system, they don't have to look far for excuses. There's plenty of reasons why people won't install them. They'll throw cost out, they'll throw out performance, they'll throw out maintenance, and groundwater tables. There's no shortage of reasons why not to do it, but there's some very big reasons why to do it. For one, you have to. It's the law in a lot of places now, and EPA is going to begin exacting fines for this. They have been asleep for a while, but some of this is changing. So on this axis here would be our here I'm presenting our conventional systems. So this is a stone-lined swale, and this would be a wet pond. We have 5 different contaminants: total suspended solids, petroleum hydrocarbons, nitrogen, zinc, and phosphorus. And on this axis is removal efficiency. So the higher the number, the better. I'm showing it for 3 different conditions, summer, winter, and annual. Reason why I bring this up is one of the biggest concerns about LID is how are they going to function in the wintertime, right? Well, the first thing you do is evaluate all the systems, conventional as well as LID across the winter. So here's our swale. This is probably 98% of what's out there. It's doing fine in the summer, does nothing in the winter. So an annual removal efficiency of maybe 30%. This is for solids, and in the interest of time, I'm going to focus on solids. Here's our pond. Does annual removal efficiency maybe 70%. So if you consider that EPA is in general looking at 80% removal efficiency for TSS, our conventional practices are not meeting that. Vegetated swale is slightly better. If we move into the LID style systems, annual performance efficiency doesn't really vary. We're well over 90% removal efficiency for a bioretention system, and we're at about 99% removal efficiency for a gravel wetland. These are high-end treatment systems. They do a lot more. They're going to cost more, and you're going to have to pay closer attention to them. You don't get more for less. Porous asphalt, and this is a subsurface infiltration system. These are the large chambers that go below parking lots. The reason I put these 2 systems together is because functionally they're very, very similar. It's the storage underneath the pavement and the fact that it's going through a filtration layer, which is essentially the sand underneath it. And you can see very, very high level of treatment. So high level of treatment is not limited to LID, it's filtration systems, really. LID just happens to be an easy way to get to filtration. So here's this, we're at about a 99% removal for both of these systems, both porous asphalt as well as ADS subsurface infiltration.
5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. 5, all right. Okay, so now we'll look at some of the manufactured devices. These are important systems to consider. Not every system can go in every location. You can't put a gravel wetland, which is 5% of your watershed area, in the middle of an urban location. However, if you have a dry pond in a location where you're in an impaired water and you need to identify retrofits, you can fit a very large system like a gravel wetland in a dry pond. It's a simple retrofit. But in a lot of urban locations, there are these types of systems that need to be considered. They go subsurface. This is an aquafilter, and they're getting around a 60% removal efficiency. And we're looking at retrofits with them now to try and improve it. And I think one very simple thing that we haven't tested would be put these things in an offline configuration. It's a low-cost addition. A little nyloplast structure on the front end might cost you a couple extra thousand for this system. This is already not a cheap system, and it's going to improve the efficiency dramatically. Hydrodynamic separators, the systems that we've been relying on for a long time, hoping that we would get 80% removal efficiencies, which is somewhat what we tend to hear about in the lab, are nowhere near this. We're really at more like a 30% removal efficiency. We've tested 5 of these systems to date. This is the average across the range of hydroseparators. They might range from a 25 to 45% removal efficiency. I do have hope for these things, though. The next thing we're going to be testing, offline configuration. If they're really getting 80% in the lab, they should be able to get 80% in a proper design situation. So it really is likely going to be that they have to be done in offline, and that's what New Jersey DEP is now requiring. So how do these systems function in cold climates? I should tell you, I took this picture today in my front yard. It didn't quite look like that, but there was a lot of ice this morning. The basic issues we look at, temperature effects, is really this. Hydrodynamic treatment systems, any system that relies on settling velocity is heavily impacted in the wintertime. And it's really this. Here's your 2 settling curves. Here's a settling curve in the wintertime, high chloride water, low temperature. Here's warm water, no chloride. And what you end up with is a system where the settling velocity for your particles have essentially been halved summer to winter, which means if you're designing for optimal performance, you're doubling the size of your system. I can tell you nobody's doing that. But if we're sizing, if we are required to meet water quality requirements for wet weather monitoring, which here in Charles River now with the new EPA requirements that are coming up, you are going to have to be looking at water quality monitoring, not simply am I implementing my stormwater management plan. So one other element to mention here is salt reduction. This hasn't hit a whole lot in Massachusetts yet. It's hitting in the I-93 corridor. EPA is beginning to pay attention to chloride loading, salt loading, and impacts to drinking water and groundwater. It's not a small issue. 4 of the 6 chloride TMDLs in the country now are in New England. This is a big deal. So one of the And it's really a simple balance. How are you going to balance public safety with aquatic habitat? We know we're going to go with public safety. So salt reduction is not the simple answer. You have to look, and there's no way to treat salt with a stormwater BMP. One element of it, though, is looking at porous pavements. Here is a dense mix asphalt an hour after plowing on a day 4 degrees below Celsius. Here's a porous asphalt pavement on a day also 4 degrees below Celsius. The pavements didn't look quite this bad right after plowing. It's a very large parking lot, so there's a lot of drift across it. But you can imagine why this system is going to have to be de-iced. This is a regular pavement, slip and fall, black ice development, all that is going to be a concern. The porous pavement on the other side, on the other hand, is much more wide open. And there's some important reasons for that I don't have time to go into today. But here's skid resistance. This is your braking ability. Higher the number, the better. Here's our 4 different application rates. The take-home message is that the 0% application on the porous asphalt has a higher friction factor than the 100% salt application on a regular pavement. This is percent snow and ice cover, so this is the likelihood of slipping and falling on the way in through the front door. But in this case, the lower the number, the better. The take-home message here is that the 25% application rate has essentially the same percent snow and ice cover as the 100% application. It's telling that if you're using porous pavements, porous asphalt, for your parking lot surface, you can get away with between 75 and 100% salt reduction for equivalent performance that you're going to get on regular asphalt. All right, and I'm actually going to skip this because I want to leave Sarah some time. So just what exactly is your point? It depends on what we're targeting. If we're targeting for the big stuff, we can get it easily. We can definitely get out shopping carts. There are no silver bullets. There's no one system that's going to do it all. Water quality, you have to target multiple items for multiple contaminants. And really what we're looking at is treatment trains. Filtration or LID systems function well in cold climates. The best results are achievable through LID-style infiltration approaches. Pre-development hydrology is achievable for new development, and I already mentioned the need to employ a treatment train. So I need to mention our funding source. Our funding source is SICEEP, the Cooperative Institute for Coastal and Estuarine Environmental Technology. Just been chopped out of the NOAA budget, so if you like this work, let them know. And with that, I leave it open to questions. Actually, I guess we'll wait till after Sarah. Thank you.
I'm going to go through my project on the fast side. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions. I work for the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and I'm implementing a grant from the federal government, from EPA, and we're studying the impact of low-impact development approaches and water conservation approaches to help restore flows in the Ipswich River. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on why we're doing this, why these approaches, why the Ipswich River. But then I'm going to emphasize on what demonstration projects we're working on on the low impact development side of this grant. Kind of in contrast to the folks who came before me, I'm going to talk a little bit about doing this work in the field with municipalities and with partners in situations where we're having to confront implementation concerns and some of the lessons that we've learned. Again, our funders are the Environmental Protection Agency, and we're cooperating with the U.S. Geological Survey in our analysis, as well as a lot of the watershed towns and the Watershed Association. Really quickly, why we're focusing on the Ipswich, many of you probably already know that the Ipswich River has a lot of hydrologic stress. It's been experiencing extreme droughts throughout the 90s and early part of this decade. And it's also been experiencing in the last few years, in particular, some extreme flood events. The Ipswich can't be talked about ignoring the background context of the fact that it exports an enormous amount of the water that's pumped in the basin. 80% of the water that is pumped by public water supplies gets shipped out of the basin either directly as drinking water or as wastewater after it's used in the basin, and it's not replenishing. So that's certainly contributing to the low flows. In addition to the wastewater export, it's got infiltration into those wastewater pipes, which are taking clean groundwater out of the basin and shipping those out along with the wastewater. So that's further reducing the aquifers and the base and the water table. So that's further reducing stream flow. However, exacerbating this problem is a lot of lawn irrigation, which creates loss because grass is very thirsty and sends that water back to the sky pretty quickly. And an increased loss due to runoff. So the flooding conditions that we see when it's storming are the counterpart to the fact that that's not getting back into the ground, as Rob mentioned. And it's the water in the ground that feeds our streams when it's not raining. So it's been estimated that the Ipswich runs at about 14.4 million gallons a day a deficit. That flow, on average, should be 14 million gallons higher. So the grant is looking, we're not dealing with the export of wastewater at this stage, other people are, but under the grant we were looking at approaches to try to address some of the concerns associated with the lawn irrigation and the increased loss to runoff. So it's that last piece that I'll be talking about here, that's the low impact development work we're doing. Overall then, the grant is demonstrating low impact development to deal with that runoff problem. It's demonstrating water conservation projects to get at that lawn watering in particular and some indoor uses. And then we're quantifying all of our demonstrations and the impact that they're having. And we're going to use, and we have been, we're in conjunction with the U.S. Geological Survey, taking the data that we're finding and modeling at a watershed scale. Are we going to actually see a return of flows to the Ipswich if we were to spread these techniques across the watershed? And if everyone were to try to adopt some of the approaches that we're modeling, will it make a difference? And then we're also using our demonstration projects to educate people. What are we finding? What are the lessons learned when we implement them right here in New England and Massachusetts? And I'm going to talk particularly about the demonstration projects on the low impact development side. I'll go through, there's 4 of them. There's a subdivision, a green roof, some work to retrofit a neighborhood that's impacting a lake, and a parking lot where we demonstrate 4 different kinds of permeable pavement. You've already heard a little bit about the purpose of low impact development. In short, you're trying to create a hydrologically functioning lot that behaves similarly to the undeveloped conditions, not identical. And some of the ways you achieve that is to reduce the amount of imperviousness, and then to use grading and preservation of open spaces and engineered gardens and planted areas and other technologies to try to direct the water that does shed off the impervious surfaces into places where it can infiltrate into the groundwater. In addition to doing that at the lot level, at the subdivision level, you want to decentralize where the infiltration is happening. On the left, the conventional development strategies tend to have a couple of large detention ponds. They may or may not infiltrate on a site. In an LID subdivision, you want to decentralize where that infiltration is happening and spread your stormwater management practices in a small scale throughout the entire development. So our LID subdivision demonstration is in Ipswich, Massachusetts. It's called Partridgeberry Place. We work with the Martins companies on this, and their engineer was Meridian Associates. And we joined up with them in partnership when they were already largely through their permitting and construction of this project. And they already were very conservation-minded in their approach. In particular, this was a very clustered site. This is 20 houses. They have preserved almost 3/4 of the site as undeveloped forest. And they've clustered large-scale homes. These are $750,000 homes on less than quarter-acre lots. They've narrowed the roads. They have drained all of the roofs to dry wells, and they planted all their landscaping with native vegetation. In order to achieve that level of cluster, they had to have a shared septic system, which they were able to get permitted. So this is the stage at which we found the project. They had 4 or 5 houses, I think, yet to be built when we joined up with them. And we asked them to add a couple of features for demonstration purposes. So they've added some rain garden features on the site to additionally take some of that runoff offline. And we also had them install grass pavers along one of their grass swales. So they designed the system so that the inner loop of this road drains to a swale that directs the water into their detention pond. And we had them, and that's also overflow parking. That swale is a very shallow swale, and it's designed for overflow parking. And we had them line that with material called grass pavers, which is a plastic matrix within the soil that prevents it from compacting. So when you park on it, it doesn't lose its infiltration properties. Here are a couple of pictures. I think I'm going to just fly through them, but this is what it looks like, and it's in Ipswich, and you're welcome to drive around and take a look at it. Our research questions here were, how do the runoff patterns at this site compare to a site that would have been developed here in a conventional way? And we are looking at runoff properties of a conventional development here through modeling. And how do the runoff patterns at the site compare to an undeveloped site? Are we truly mimicking natural hydrology? And then to the extent that we are seeing differences between this site and a conventional site, what are contributing most to those differences? Is it the clustering? Is it the added stormwater features? We're getting at some of these questions by micro-monitoring the entire site everywhere that we can get in and find out how much runoff is occurring and where it's going, where it's ending up, what are the inflows and outflows of the different features. We're working with Geosyntech on this study. And then they're also taking a forested watershed in part of the preserved open space portion of this lot and monitoring runoff there to look at what the natural hydrology really is. I'm not going to get into our results, unfortunately, today. They're still under review. They will be out shortly, and we've heard about some of the results today. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the implementation lessons that we've learned. And hopefully in a couple more months, I'll be back out on the road talking about what we've actually found for lessons. But I did want to talk about some of the things that we found on the implementation side. One of them is that the rain garden on this property, they have one large rain garden that we've had them now. So there's grass swales that drained, as I mentioned before, into the detention pond. Now they drain into a rain garden that's pre-treatment for that detention pond. And the hope is that we can get it to recharge before it fills up and overflows into that detention pond. And the design specs were that a 1-inch storm would infiltrate entirely in the rain garden and never overflow. As it turns out, the infiltration rates in this rain garden were not what they were spec'd to be. The Geosyntech has worked with rain gardens and monitored ones that can infiltrate up to 12 inches. I think 12 was one, and 17, I have this written down, 17, 12, into 17 inches per hour into those, and what they're finding at this one is 0.6 inches. So they did a soil analysis and found that, in fact, the soils contained 60 to 70% sand, 5 to 8% gravel, and 20 to 30% silt and clay. And when they went back and looked at the specs, those should have been 50, and the specs that they already know should be in parts of what biosoils, the rain garden, are 50 to 60% sand, 20 to 30% topsoil, 20 to 30% leaf compost, and should not have any silt or clay in them. And we sort of asked around, and no one really remembered how that got mixed. And there was the suspicion that probably it was made out of materials on site during construction, with the assumption that it would more or less meet the specs, but it dramatically impacted the performance. And it just sort of underscores the point that the details really matter when you're installing these systems if you want them to perform as they're designed. Similarly, the grass pavers, along the edges where cars have been parking on them, they have started to lose their grass and show that plastic matrix. And again, that was a maintenance issue and a question of who was responsible for that maintenance. And there had been a bit of a breakdown in communication between the developer and the homeowners association, which we're now going back and trying to reestablish and get some clarity on. So people need to buy in, people do need to be aware of the maintenance in order to make sure that these are installed correctly, and in order to make sure that they're maintained properly so that they continue to function. I'm going to talk about the green roof. This is another project in Ipswich. It's on a redeveloped building that was a factory at one time in its history. It was a school at a different point in its history. It's a pretty small building. It shares a parking lot with Town Hall in Ipswich. It's directly across from it. And it's redeveloped into senior affordable housing. It's about a 3,000 square foot roof, and we had an extensive green roof installed on that with mostly sedum plants and about 3 inches of soil. And the questions that we're asking here are, to what extent is the volume of runoff reduced from this roof relative to the town hall roof, conventional control there right across the parking lot? And to what extent are the concentrations of pollutants reduced due to this technology? And this is a building that is right on the Ipswich River. It's about 50 feet from the river, so it's a situation where it does make sense to think about green roof as a technology, because it's going to help you reduce runoff and help you clean the runoff you are experiencing. It's not going to do a good job at recharging groundwater, so we didn't think about installing this in the upper fragile areas of the watershed where our highest priority was recharge. This is much more of a non-point source solution. Some of the implementation lessons here, we did look around for a while. In some of the newer buildings, there was a maintenance shed for the DPW that we looked at in Ipswich that didn't have a strong enough roof. The roof on this building was bomb-proof. All they did was put our entire new roof on top of the old one. But you do need a building that you're either constructing with a little bit of extra load-bearing capacity or that already has it. This is heavy roofs. We also realized that in order to have regular and effective maintenance of the green roof up there, it doesn't need a lot of maintenance. It's designed not to need a lot, but it does need some. In order for that to be done, for equipment to get up there, for it to be done safely, we needed a walkout stairwell. And this is sort of a question of thinking about permitting and planning and all the people you need to be in communication with as you're thinking through a project. What happened to us was there was, pull-down ladder access, and partway through the project they decided, well, no, we really need kind of a walk-up staircase to make this work. And before we knew it, we heard from the Historic Commission in Ipswich, who said, if you build a head house at that angle coming out of the roof, it's going to destroy the historic character of the building, and we're not going to allow that. You should have talked to us earlier before you designed this. And there's kind of a crisis moment in the project. We had to go back, slightly redesign the shape of the head house. We got by and it worked, but it kind of gave us a pause. Similarly, there's a question of if this is a public demonstration, do we need to design it to meet the American Disabilities Act requirements and safety railings and all these things? And in order to make it a public demonstration but not actually allow the public to access it, we were able to get access by going up on the roof of Town Hall and looking down at it, and that's our public access to it. But it's just interesting to sort of see how these things come out. I'm going to talk about 2 different projects that we did in the town of Wilmington around Silver Lake, which is a recreational lake that the town uses. There's boating, there's beach access, there's fishing. And we did some work in a neighborhood on the north side of the lake and some work around the beach and the parking lot. I'm going to start in the south, around the beach itself. We took 2 direct stormwater discharges that were on either side of the beach that were draining neighborhoods behind the lake and daylighted the last 40 to 50 yards of those discharges into vegetated swales to give that stormwater treatment and give it a chance to infiltrate. And also, in the case of one of the swales, we replaced very, delicious goose habitat with non-delicious plants and a pretty steep slope, so the geese are no longer congregating there. And this is the parking lot right behind the beach. This is a picture of it before we redeveloped it. It was in need of redevelopment anyway, and the town knew that they were having beach closures at this beach due to water quality, and they wanted to combine an opportunity to redevelop their parking lot with an opportunity to address the quality problems in the lake, which is why we partnered up with them. And we demonstrated 4 different kinds of permeable pavement on this site and fire retention. So we used permeable pavers, we used porous asphalt, we used a material called gravel pave, which is again a plastic matrix that is just below the surface of the gravel that keeps it from compacting, so it retains its infiltration properties, and a proprietary product called FlexiPave, which is made out of crushed and recycled tires. And our research questions on this side were actually, is groundwater quality negatively impacted by converting the surface to a permeable surface? Are you going to be getting the salt and the car pollutants, heavy metals now down into the groundwater by making that permeable surface? Are we successful in reducing beach closures? And what is the performance of these technologies in the winter in particular? Let's see if it's worth. In general, this has been a very successful project. I think I'm running out of time to tell some of the anecdotes. The security vandalism was kind of interesting. We had the landscaper put in several plants with bald roots, and they were stolen within days of being put in. So he went to planting non-bald root plants and had to reduce the size and attractiveness of those for theft. That was interesting. So far, all of the pavements are performing to spec. They're draining well, even in the winter. And I'm going to quickly now talk about the last project, which is the north side of the lake. We retrofitted a neighborhood. This is a picture of the street prior to our project. And we installed in the public right-of-way 13 pocket rain gardens that are in people's front yards, but that are actually officially part of the public right-of-way. And we took a section of the road and installed permeable paving stones along the side of it. And then redirected some of the stormwater coming off the driveways and off the roofs into these features to take them out of the stormwater system. And our research questions here are, have we reduced the volume of stormwater being loaded into that lake, and have we reduced the pollutant concentrations in the runoff that is still going into the stormwater system? We have had reasonable success of homeowner buy-in. I think the homeowners like the gardens. They didn't have a lot of choice about them being there, so we gave them some choice in what to plant and had them come out last June and pick some of their favorite kinds of plantings that we had available and learn a little bit about how to maintain them. And the DPW department has made clear that they don't have the extra resources to garden and maintain these over time, so they've encouraged us strongly to get the homeowners to take on that responsibility. The DPW will enforce its public right-of-way jurisdiction, and if a homeowner fills these in, they will be responsible for getting them replaced. But if they go dormant and dead and they're not taken care of, if they're still functioning from a stormwater perspective, the town is going to let that lie. So we're hoping that the homeowners have bought in, and we're going to see these maintained, and that's some of the stuff that we keep our eye on moving forward. I'm not going to talk about our water conservation projects because we're out of time, but there are 5 of them. And as I mentioned before, we're also going to be taking the results of these studies and modeling them at the watershed scale and asking questions about if implemented very widely, are we going to see the kinds of returns and flows that we're hoping to see. And again, we've got a lot of outreach that we're doing around these projects so people can see that they're happening in New England, they're happening in Massachusetts, this is what they look like, these are what we've dealt with, these are lessons we've learned. And we're doing that through tours. We've got a website that's pretty extensively describes the projects and is periodically updated with results. We're conducting workshops with municipal boards, with technical associations, professional associations, conferences like this. We are planning a legislative educational forum, and through our publications and end products, we're hoping to get the word out about this stuff as well. That's it.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And other panelists, can we give a quick round of applause to our I think we have time for a couple of quick questions, if anybody has some. Yes, sir.
Just real quick, Rob, you were mentioning taking like a storm center offline to get a better performance. What do you mean by offline?
I mean, you can install it with a high flow bypass configuration in front of it. So simply some type of structure that allows your design flow. So say, well, 1 CFS water quality flow will enter the system, but when it gets beyond a certain depth, it's skimming off the top and passing that through a high flow bypass that literally goes around the hydrodynamic separator. The hydro separator's biggest problem is resuspension. So if you can get the non-design flows out of them,
You just recapture the first flush.
so it's getting everything up to the, exactly, it's getting the first flush, and it's not just first flush, because first flush is really volume. It's getting, it's only taking up to a certain flow rate through it. So if your water quality flow rate again is a 1 CFS, anything over that is going around it, and it's preventing scour from, say, a 3 CFS or a 5 or even a 10 CFS that may have gone through that system previously.
Right there in front.
I'm most interested in nitrogen removal from Cape Cod, and looking at your results, it looks like gravel wetlands have the best results by far. What's the pluses and minuses on those? You mentioned they take up a lot of space.
Yeah, they're very large systems, but they work really well for nitrogen removal. I mean, they've basically been used in replace of septic systems. Those were basically pulled out of previous usage for wastewater and applied for stormwater. If you think about stormwater, you might get a nitrogen concentration of 5 milligrams per liter nitrogen versus wastewater, which would be 40 to 100. So they can handle the load. They're just larger and they're more expensive to build. But again, if you couch it in the context that a lot of structures are already built for quantity management, you can fit that in it. If you're having to come up with new real estate for it, they're reasonably large. So it's like any stormwater wetland. You're looking at probably, as a rule of thumb, 5% of your watershed area.
In the back.
Yeah, at the Stormwater Research Center, do you have highway superintendent day where you can bring old school highway superintendents out to sort of show these things? Because there's a lot of resistance in some places, particularly if you've got a career employee who doesn't want to go there.
I understand exactly. Yes, do we have a highway career superintendent day? No, but we do regular workshops, and absolutely we get that all the time. Yep. We run workshops about a dozen a year for our regular workshops for LID, and then we run specialty workshops for the porous pavements, which are the ones that they're really against. But to give you an idea, New Hampshire DOT, when we started talking to them about it in 2004, they really didn't like it. For obvious reasons, roadway engineers are taught to keep the water out of the roadbed, even though we all know it gets in there anyhow. I mean, if you drive down. So, but New Hampshire DOT this last summer built a porous pavement as part of this chloride TMDL I spoke about in the I-93 corridor. So they have it it's a bus transfer facility. It's a big parking lot. I haven't actually seen it yet, but I believe it's 13 acres. It's a big area, so they're wading in on it. They're aware of it. Vermont Department of Transportation just built the pervious pavement up in Randolph. It's coming.
Well, I didn't think that 75% salt reduction in porous pavement would at least get their attention.
Oh yeah.
Take a look at it.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's part of that I-93. There's a chloride working group, and that information is out. So yeah, agreed. Very important point.
2 more really quick questions.
I want to go back to the issue of hydrodynamic separators. I thought the issue with poor performance had to do with salt, and the offline testing, how does that address the issue of salt? Or is the performance still going to be poor in wintertime?
It's both. But if you looked, the annual or the summer performance was maybe 35–40%. The winter performance might have been 10% less. So even summertime they weren't doing very well. So the issue really is resuspension. In the lab settings, usually they're only challenged up to 125% of the design flow. Well, that's just not reality. You have, like our systems are designed, their water quality flow is a 1 CFS, but they easily see 350% of that flow through them easily, sometimes much more.
Last quick question. Yes.
Just going back to the porous concrete for a moment, I'm from the town of Easton, and we just had some sidewalks installed with porous concrete.
Hey, that's great. Perfect usage.
Well, I have 2 questions related to that. So, if it fails, because that's one of the concerns of the DPW director is that it will break up, we know it's due to the installation method, and we don't have any experience. So, I think it's going to be incumbent and probably a challenge to find experts that can be on site during so that's more of a statement, but the question I had is, I've received complaints from the DPW, who've received complaints that people don't like the way it feels underfoot.
Especially the skateboarders.
Well, although we don't, that was my reaction, that, I could understand being a rollerblader, that if you were, there would definitely be a difference, but have you received any kind of complaints that people
Sure.
feel like it's causing them to trip or fall or safety hazards?
I think the simple answer is, if you're looking for a reason not to do it, the list is very, 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 very long. But there are a lot of good reasons for doing it. Yeah, sure, we've seen it, and there's problems. I think porous pavements suffer from aesthetics a little bit. For example, you look at a lot of commercial applications, they're trying to get that pavement as smooth and dark as possible. But that's not, from a stormwater functionality standpoint, it's zero. But from an aesthetic standpoint, which everybody's on board with, it's very high. So, yeah, there's issues. As far as the installation piece, everything's got a life cycle. So I think you would know if it was a poor installation within the first 6 months. So certainly after the first winter, but the first 6 months you should probably know. And typically you can see the raveling right away. But the long term is that you should be getting a longer service life out of these because you're controlling for freeze thaw the way you're designing these things.
All right, thank you.
That's all the time we have for today. Please do fill out your conference evaluation form and drop it off on your way out today. And these presentations will be available on the Smart Energy website probably within a couple weeks. So thanks for coming, and thanks again to the panelists.